Welcome to the third episode of the IDC Dialogue series. In this episode, we are discussing the strategies needed to promote South-South cooperation among development finance institutions and also the value chain financing in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. We'll also be delving into the models of value chain finance, and these have been accepted globally as solutions to the funding challenges of micro, small, and medium enterprises. I'm Godfrey Mutizwa. Let me introduce my distinguished panel of experts. On my immediate left, I have got Adebayo Jimo. He is Vice Chairman of the Africa Association of Development Finance Institutions. Following him, Jeffrey Qena, CEO of the Industrial Development Corporation. And then next to him, we have Datuk Wan Aja Wan Ahmad. He is the chairman of the Association of Development Financing Institutions in Asia and the Pacific. It's a long title. I'll cut it short because we like to keep things short in broadcast. Last but not least, he's Christian Kingombe. He's Chief Integration Officer, Regional Integration and Trade Division at the African Development Bank. Another long title. I'm going to keep them short today. Gentlemen, welcome. Let's begin first by looking at the structures that we have for building cooperation between development finance institutions across the Asia, Africa, Pacific region, South-South cooperation. Can I begin with you, Mr. Chairman of, from Asia Pacific? If you can just give us a broad overview, whether the structures that we have in place at the moment are working, and if they are not, what we need to make them work.
Let me just start by stating what is obvious, basically in the sense of the presence of associations that helped put together DFIs from various countries in various parts of the region. In the case of Association of DFIs in Asia and the Pacific, it is an association that puts together more than 100 over institutions that deals with development financing and involving 40 over countries. So what it does is, in essence, group together practitioners with similar objectives. And expanding beyond that is the presence of such associations in any other part of the world. So the collaboration that we talk about and the preparation for the collaboration is, in essence, dependent on the strength of the two associations on being able to put together such a platform. The infrastructure that you were making reference to is basically adding on to identifying the shortcomings of various locations and various associations, and being able to address it at that level as a start.
Right.
Yeah. So from then on, you start building on what is needed to be done next. Yeah. So maybe if I can touch a little bit about the purpose of the collaboration that we have today. From the Asia-Pacific region, we realized that there is a lot of economic activities between the two continents, and there's been requests from businesses for us to look into availing support and assistance to businesses that are conducting business in the African region. So in 2010, we signed an understanding with AADFI, the Association of DFIs in the Asia and in the Africa continent, to work out such collaboration. Through 2 years of planning, it finally ended up with this platform that we have today. So it is a good start for us to actually explore and go into the details of where the shortcomings are. Yeah. And we hope that this platform allows much more integration between the two regions for us to cooperate further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're here, of course, in Johannesburg. So this is, in essence, a demonstration of that partnership that you are talking about.
Yes.
Let me come to the African perspective, and I want to put the same question to you, Mr. Jimo. You are the Vice Chairman of the Association of African DFIs. From where you stand, and also from a regional perspective within the West Africa region, are you seeing benefits flowing out of this cooperation with our counterparts in Asia? I mean, we speak a lot about South-South cooperation, but practically, do we hear about actually these things happening on the ground?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think this event is an event whose time has come because if you look at the two blocks, the Asian and Africa, the signing of that understanding for an integration in 2010 has really opened up a lot of activities for the African DFIs. We have started with an initial program of study tour that made some of the African DFIs to visit India and visit other Asian countries to understand how they are managing, regulating, and practicing their basic development finance activities. And that has been a way of opening up a lot of ideas, which we have more or less been having on a win-win, exchanging information with our counterparts. And when coming back home, these are discussed at the sub-regional level. And with the support of the African Development Bank for ADFI, I think that knowledge sharing is assisting to broaden the scope of the structures and institutions that the African DFIs presently have in a way of borrowing from the growth that we have noticed the Asian and the Pacific have achieved. So by and large, it's been a wonderful relationship.
You sound like you are happy.
Yeah, I think I am.
Would you want to take the opportunity to ask for more that needs to be done to enhance that relationship and deepen it?
Well, asking for more will be based on our goals, and the major objective is to develop the rural setup, which by definition in the whole world, I think the Asian and African countries have more functions to tackle the rural poverty. And I believe the knowledge from the study tour in India has assisted a lot of the African development finance institutions to understand how the rural setup could be managed properly.
Mr. Kreiner, let me come to you. You're a constituent member of the AADFI, and therefore, of course, one of the principal voices in driving what issues should be looked at, what structures should be built. As a member, are you satisfied? You have license here to say if you are not happy or not.
I had a privilege of leading the association for 4 years. So for a start, if I'm not satisfied, that means I contributed to it. But in fact, I am very satisfied. I think the fact that we have ADFIAP and ADFI today, where we are really putting to practice what we had signed in 2010, to me is a sign that a significant progress has been made. We, as DFI's Development Finance Institution, we're meeting at a time when the world has changed, when the recession that we experienced in 2008 has not fully come out, where a number of industries and a number of countries are still reeling. So it is important for the developing countries really to come together at different levels. So we know at government they do that, but now development finance institutions, which are institutions that provide long-term finance, that take that risk which ordinarily other institutions would not ordinarily take, are actually collaborating, and they're doing it concretely. The vice chairman of ADFI has mentioned the study tour. I mean, actually, I attended one in Korea as well, where it was also an eye-opener, now, where in terms of some of the experiences that we're undergoing now, they've gone through, where we can learn. So, in fact, for now, I'm very satisfied. I think we're making actually good progress.
Does the answer lie in Asia, though? Should we not looking at other parts of the world as well? Or are there structures that enhance that cooperation, apart from the South-South that we're trying to talk about here?
Well, the South-South cooperation is not only, it's not saying it's the exclusion of the others. I think it just complements those. Okay. In fact, what happens is on an annual basis, all the development finance institutions on the sidelines of the World Bank meetings, they do meet. But I think what we need to do, we have to say, what is it that is in common on the developing countries, particularly in the South to South ones. So and then say, how can we learn from those? Because we're all coming up. I mean, we might be having different cultures, but some of the experiences have been the same. So what we do is we're learning so that we can complement that. Also, it gives us an ability to ensure that we have the muscle to can engage with those in the northern part.
Let me bring our fourth member of the panel here into the conversation, Christian Kingombe. He is Chief Integration Officer at the African Development Bank. Christian, if I can look at it from a bank perspective, when you work with the regional associations, when you work with the individual members. Are you finding that the structures that they have put in place are working, or are you having to go overdrive in order to be able to make them work better together, or for you to be able to provide the technical support that they need?
Well, first of all, the mission of the African Development Bank as the premier multilateral development institution on the African continent is to help reduce poverty and improve the living conditions of the Africans. And this is done by mobilizing resources and investing in our regional member countries as well as the regional economic communities. So the bank is doing this in different ways. We are mobilizing resources which are being invested in those countries, and we are providing policy advice, and we have a number of activities on the continent, such as regional infrastructure development, private sector development, improving the enabling environment for businesses, aid for trade, and so on. And we use a number of we use both financial instruments as well as non-financial instruments. Some of the financial instruments are, for instance, we just recently established Africa Trade Fund.
Yeah.
And one of the key areas of this Africa Trade Fund is to help African producers to improve their product and market development.
Right.
That is one of our activities that we're doing.
Then you want to come in?
Yes, I wanted to come in. I think if you look at AADFI, being the African part of the association in this instance, the collaboration we have with the African development is very, very strong, because what they are providing is also technical support. About 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, I think the vice chairman will probably know the dates well, they provided a facility where we can help improve the technical abilities of the DFIs by ensuring that there's a rating system that is in place, because one of the key issues was, as Christian says, then we make available financing, but then the African Development Bank needed to be comfortable that the systems in place in the development finance institutions are up to speed. And as a result, there was a consultant that was put in place, and there was a program to ensure that we help each other as DFIs to make sure that our systems are in place, so that when we have access to this financing, then we are comfortable that we have the systems to ensure that we disburse it. I think that's the support we've been getting from them. But also they do provide from time to time other technical assistance in terms of trainings and exposures.
Okay.
So, just to buttress that point on our rating systems, it's now a standard for even accessing loans in some of the sub-regional blocks, that you must attain a particular rating system, because it emphasizes issues of governance. It emphasizes issues of best international practices, which, of course, the African Development Bank insists on. So I can understand him when he said he's not too sure. But I believe the answer is that, yes, we are listening. Because between us, we've been able to develop a checklist of standards which have to be rated. And the self-assessment is done in such a way that it is very quantitative, and it even involves external processes to determine where you stand. And without it, there are a lot of windows, funding windows, that the DFIs cannot access. And I think that credit goes to the relationship that we've been having with the African Development Bank, and it's been very consistent, and I believe it to be sustainable.
Okay, let's move on and discuss the lessons that perhaps we can pick out of from Asia Pacific. I mean, Mr. Grena, you spoke about the fact that you went on a study tour to India, and there were lessons that were picked there. But from where you stand, what do you think Africa could pick up? Because Africa is at that juncture where the private sector is growing, economies are growing, but a lot of people are questioning the inclusiveness of that growth and saying that a large part of the population is being left behind. What can we take out of your region?
We have, on several occasions, received delegates from Africa on study tours. And we find that in our interaction with them, there are some similarities and there are some differences in terms of how we operate. One thing that is very evident in the Asian financial institution and the landscape is the agenda on creating access to financing being more enhanced. There is an intermediary that's present in the entire banking landscape, which creates an access to financing, an institution that is deliberately set up to create that access to financing, and it takes the shape of a guarantee mechanism. And we find that there are a lot of queries and questions as to how to create that access. What it does is basically match the needs of the people wanting to have financing and match the needs of the people that are lending and bridging that gap. For example, borrowers, I'm here in my capacity as chairman of AFIAP.
Right.
Yeah. Now that's of course a part-time job. I am the CEO of a credit guarantee institution in Malaysia, and we have a very important role and a duty to perform, which is creating that access to financing. There is a gap between an SMEs wanting financing from commercial banks and SMEs wanting financing from DFIs, which has different structure in terms of its pricing mechanism, different eligibility criteria. So we have the task of making sure those differences are neutralized in a way, and in that sense it becomes easier for the SMEs to avail to financing both from the commercial banks as well as from DFIs.
Yeah.
The guarantee mechanism works in a way where SMEs that do not have collateral or that do not have track record, how do they avail financing to commercial banks? They probably can get financing from DFIs which with greater success because DFIs supported by the government has a developmental role. But how do you make the commercial banks take on that responsibility of supporting developmental role as well?
How do you do it?
Yes. So the evidence and the presence of the guarantee mechanism actually bridge that gap between what the borrowers are able to provide the banks and between what the banks actually wants the borrower to have. The bank wants collateral, the bank wants track record. The borrower doesn't have that, the borrower needs loan. So the guarantee mechanism actually creates an opportunity for that borrower to build track record, right? And also substitute the lack of collateral with the guarantee in place. So that is very clear. It's present in the Asian environment. You get guarantee institutions in Japan and in Korea that has been around for 70 over years, and they have really supported the creating access to financing. And from the visits that we get from African counterparts, that seems to be the problem. And I think my colleague spoke about rating system. There is basically no universal rating system in a country. Every bank has their own rating system. Oftentimes the borrower gets confused as to what is his actual credit standing. So that is one thing that we have to address.
I actually saw Ms. Krena nodding his head, suggesting that you are in agreement with the mechanism that they put up in Asia, and perhaps suggesting that you think it's potentially something that we could use here in Africa.
Yes, when we went to Korea, because that's where I went, I think he went to India, I think that was the lessons that we learned there. So here you have institutions that have made strong inroads into the SME sector. The SME sector that does not have collateral, that does not have track record, but provides a good input that also employs people. And I think that's the lessons that we've learned, that over and above the guarantee system that they provide, but the fact that they come in much earlier to try and de-risk the project, it makes it easier than when we leverage the private sector. I think it's important that we all pick up from those lessons, because as we know, in the continent here, the issue of unemployment is still something that needs to be addressed. We have a continent that is still growing. So it provides an opportunity for us not to reinvent the wheel, to learn, which is why these study tours we've really embraced this.
Let's keep the conversation around funding, because that's one of the key challenges. And the other issue around funding is, of course, the cost of that finance when you get it to these people right on the ground. And feel free to contribute, everybody here. How do we keep the cost of funding these SSMMEs? Because we know where they are coming from. We've spoken about the challenges they have. They have no collateral. They do not have good credit standing. How do we keep it low and affordable? Let me begin with you, and I'll take it right through to everybody.
Well, I think that's a major role that DFIs are set up to perform, to provide that window for the SMEs at almost a level of affordability. But the other issues go beyond just providing the funds. It is assessing the processes that will lead to the utilization of the funds for better returns. And that is the critical challenge. And what do I mean? There are critical issues that the SMEs are facing. Infrastructure is very, very key. Data, market information that will enable them to understand what to do. So the information gap that the DFIs need to provide to support that chain for the SMEs is one knowledge that I think we picked up from the Asia Pacific.
Yeah.
Because they have adequate data, they have an improvement on infrastructure, making cost of production very easy and competitive. Because at the end of it, it is the market that will bring up the fund that you put into your investment.
Yeah.
So that is very critical.
Yeah. So there are many facets here that we can talk about. You want to add?
Yeah, I think one other area, which is what you find in value chain financing, is where you have linkages.
Yeah.
So if an SME is providing, for an example, raw material to a processor, so what you do is you provide financing to a processor so that he or she links the provider of raw material. Because what you're doing is you have to try and de-risk the project. Because really the pricing talks to the risk that one perceives in the particular project. So the more you can de-risk the project, the better. So if you provide the support, and then if you ensure that the market issue is addressed, so those contribute to that. But also as development finance institutions, we're not here to maximize the financial. We have to ensure that we're sustainable.
Yeah.
So because we have that ability, I think then we allow then that we contribute in ensuring that the cost of the funding is reduced.
Christian, I believe that's one of your focus areas at the bank, value chain financing. How do we keep those costs low, and how do we make sure that these SMMEs and people that are getting these loans on the ground are actually able to effectively use them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, one of the advantages that the bank has a AAA rating on a capital market, which allows the bank to get cheap financing from international markets.
Sure.
That's one thing that's keeping the cost down. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of microfinance support from the bank side, there's been two approaches. There's been the standalone approach where microfinance institution has received disbursement directly from the bank. For instance, from the period 2006 to 2011, there was around 31 microfinance operations from the bank. And then also in the past, particularly when microfinance operations was driven by our agriculture and agribusiness department, oftentimes there would be a credit element within a big infrastructure project or a big agricultural project.
Right.
However, one of the problems with this approach is that oftentimes if there's a cost overrun, microfinance would tend to be squeezed. So that is some of the issues that we have been facing.
Yeah.
But then again, also in terms of looking at agricultural value finance, it's an important part of the business environment. And you can see it both from the government's point of view in terms of providing public goods.
Yeah.
Giving access to microfinance or giving access to rural finance is a very important part in ensuring that that the incomes in the rural areas and in economies, they can be more vibrant and more productive, which is what we are striving at the end of the day.
Yeah, the message I keep hearing is that it's not just about cheap loans, it's also about building systems and talking to people and providing people with the adequate technical support that they need. But is that the same thing that you've picked up in Asia Pacific? Before you take that question, I just want to let you know that we've got 2 minutes left remaining in the program, and I want you to give us recommendations of how we make sure that effectively we get that financial support that's needed onto the ground for the SMMEs to be able to grow up. Let me come to you, sir.
I think what has been mentioned about the pricing and all that is somewhat accurate, because the issue is not so much, although there is a need for lower pricing and good rates.
Nominally.
But the bigger picture is actually creating that access.
Yeah.
And a lot of, if you don't create enough access, there will be a lot of activities that are non-banking related. You can get into an area of illegal money lending, because it's a question of access. And SMEs, smaller businesses especially, they have been known to pay very high costs to get financing and funds. So I also observe that for a DFI, there is a tendency also sometimes to go from the high infrastructure financing right down to the microfinancing.
Right.
Probably, if you can perfect that, that's fine, all well and good. But it takes too